Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for showing up in person to discuss this important topic. We're here to talk about putting public assets to work through innovative finance. Or, to translate that into plain English, we're here to talk about how to fix cities with one weird trick: housing and jobs near transit. We all know that we need to do this, and that this is a simple idea that makes sense. However, it is a little bit more complicated to actually deliver on the idea than it is to think of it. First, we have to deal with the hard reality that transit-oriented development is more complex and has inherently higher costs and pre-development risk than greenfield development in the middle of nowhere. It is harder to do the right thing than the wrong thing sometimes. When to-do lists are very long and you can't get it all done, inevitably, the focus shifts to the things that are easier to accomplish. That's natural and not an evil impulse. As we think about how to solve this problem, transportation comes to the table with site control, but it does not have a lot of other tools to bring to the table in order to solve the problem of how to get transit-oriented development done. That has to change. And so I am really excited to welcome here today our friends from USDOT who are bringing new tools to the table in order to come at this challenge. They're directly addressing the fact that we have an opportunity to better integrate transportation and land use that will enable us to achieve our climate goals, help solve the housing crisis, and unlock more growth for our economy. These tools can directly address the barriers that exist to integrating land use and transportation in terms of their polar opposite financing and delivery models. We are going to help those two things come together. I am extremely excited to introduce Morteza Farajian. He's the Executive Director of the Build America Bureau at the U.S. Department of Transportation. He's been a senior executive leading that team since April 2019, but prior to that position, he served as Acting Deputy Secretary of Transportation and Director of Public-Private Partnerships for transportation in Virginia. Over 7 years, he led procurement, financing, and contract negotiation of multiple multimodal transportation projects totaling $10 billion in value. So he has had to live this and walk this. Without further ado, Morteza.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's very exciting to be here with you today. I know that this is a topic that many of us love to talk about it. But, and by the way, I just started the stopwatch because they have told me that I only have 2 hours. So I want to make sure that before we start talking about some of the new tools that we have, everyone in the audience understands where we are coming from. Build America Bureau. How many of you have heard about Build America Bureau in the past? A lot of hands. That's great, because when I joined Build America Bureau back in 2019, I couldn't see so many hands going up when I would ask that question in some of the events. I'm glad that today, after 5 years, after all the expansion we have had, after the great job that my outreach team has done to just get out there and educate folks in events like today's event, we are seeing more hands going up. But Build America Bureau was created last year of President Obama's administration to be the one-stop shop within U.S. Department of Transportation to house two main loan programs. One of them is called TIFIA, T-I-F-I-A. The other one is RIF, R-R-I-F. Don't ask me to tell you exactly what those letters stand for, because I can't remember. But in short, TIFIA, both of those programs have been around for a long time. But TIFIA was mainly for highway, transit, and intermodal facilities. RIF was mainly for railroad projects. They have been around for many years, over 25 years, but both of them significantly underutilized. Well, a lot has changed since 2019. First of all, we have tried to get out there and explain to people that how they can take advantage of those projects and those loans for their projects. When I was in Virginia, I joke about this, but I think it is true that Virginia was the #1 borrower. And especially over the last 4 years that was there, $10 billion worth of projects that we delivered, most of those projects, if not all of those projects, benefited from the loan programs. We would get almost half of what Build America Bureau was closing every year, and the rest of the United States was the other half. That was the question that I was asked during my interview when I was being offered this job, that why other states are not taking advantage of these loans. They're low interest, the treasury rate, they're flexible, they can go long term, more than 35 years in some cases, and now with some of the new changes that we have got because of bipartisan infrastructure law, we can go up to 75 years, no prepayment penalty. It can save even those cities and states that have very good rating, AA rated, AAA rated, single A rated, compared to what they can get in bond market. These loans can save them anywhere from 20 to 40%. So the question is why these programs are underutilized, why you have over $100 billion, and that's with B, available, but folks are not taking advantage of it. If it costs just 3%, 4%, 2%, 5% to borrow, but construction cost escalation is 10%, why people are waiting for their projects to get grant and maybe sometimes not get a grant? These projects are delayed for years, adding to the cost 10%, 8%, 9%, 12% every year, but they're not financing the projects. What I thought was the case, which still I think to a great degree is the case, is that a lot of these localities, particularly localities, they do not have the capacity to think about alternative ways of getting these projects done, to think about financing. They're used to funding. They have been doing it for many, many years to fund their projects. They're used to facing their projects when they don't have money, but they're not used to bundling. They're not used to leveraging their future resources. They're not used to financing their projects using some of these innovative approaches. And that's, I think, the reason that we created a technical assistance office within Build America Bureau, especially over the last couple of years, and through various conversations that we have had to provide technical assistance to some of these borrowers to help them think outside the box, think about various options that they have. And by the way, we're not going to tell to them and saying that just use all of your future dollars and finance all of your projects and spend the money on bad projects that are not worth building. That's not the case at all. We tell them that go through the normal process to select the right projects. But for those right projects, when you think about how to deliver them, consider all options, including financing them through our loans. It has worked because we have got new programs from Congress. The program we're talking about today is one of the grant programs that bipartisan infrastructure law authorized, and money was appropriated for it. NOFO is out there in the street, and we are accepting applications, which is solely focused on creating capacity to think outside the box, being able to hire full-time staff, being able to hire consultants, being able to have that dedicated team that can think about alternative ways, more effective, more efficient ways to get these projects off the ground. And that's why I'm so excited about it. It's not the only tool we have. We actually have 4 different programs right now. A regional infrastructure accelerator program. We have created 24 of those. We have given 24 grants to different applicants over the last 3 years. Our thriving communities that you may have heard about it. And we have another program that is specifically for rural and tribal communities, and this one. 4 different tools, 4 different purposes. Sometimes you can mix and match them. You can combine them. You can take advantage of all of them. But today, we can tell communities that you have the opportunity to think outside the box. You have the opportunity to apply for this grant. You have the opportunity to hire the right consultants. And we will help you, either through the grants or through direct technical assistance. We also conduct workshops with them. Unlike some of the other programs that we have, especially discretionary grant programs, that they're very competitive. And there's usually a huge firewall between USDOT or the modes that are reviewing the applications and project applicants. With our loan programs, because they're undersubscribed, because they're not competing against each other, we can actually sit in the room with them and help them to think outside the box and think about how they can put a package together that gives them the best value. And that's the beautiful thing that I love about Build America Bureau, because the whole process is very collaborative. Well, this grant program in general, we do think that it's going to be competitive. So I cannot just stay around and be part of the conversations later this afternoon, because we want to make sure that everyone has access to the same information and everything is fair. But once we award the grants, once we create our regional infrastructure accelerators, or once people, project sponsors, submit their letters of interest and they want to start the process with us, we can sit down with them, we can guide them, we can even help them on how to write the best letter of interest, because our intention, our goal is exactly aligned with them, is to make sure that that project can take advantage of every dollar that we can provide and be structured in a way that not only taxpayers are protected. By the way, I can brag about this. We have less than 1% default rate. So taxpayers are well protected. But all of the other projects that they're moving forward and borrowing from us and getting things done faster, can also say that we save time, we save money. Instead of phasing projects and adding additional soft costs as well as construction cost escalation, we're able to bundle things and create efficiencies. This program in particular is focused on assets that are underutilized, mainly. It's not just limited to that. You can go and read the NOFO. You can watch some of the webinars that we have had. We have experts that have talked about all the different eligibility criteria. But the emphasis of the program is on the assets. I can give you one example. Let's say that there is a transit agency, and that transit agency owns a parking lot, surface parking lot, right next to a transit station. We want to identify those assets. We want to look at those assets. We want the transit agency to actually hire the right consultants to look at zoning requirements, to look at utility that may be required for it, or access point that may be required for it, or market conditions, and figure out, screen those assets and figure out whether this asset has potential for something else. Maybe mixed-use development, maybe something else, maybe a government building, maybe a school, maybe a library, but something else, not just a surface parking lot. And by the way, you can always provide the same number of parking lots if you develop this asset. The challenge, the problem is that right now, and when I was in Virginia, I used to ask this question from my colleagues in Virginia, that do we even have the inventory of our assets? Most of them exist somewhere on the shelf. Do we know which one of those assets are being utilized to the fullest extent? Do we know which one of them are underutilized? And the answer most of the time is no. Or even if some transit agencies have done some studies, that study is on the shelf somewhere. What we are trying to do is not only to give out these grants so that project sponsors who have these assets can actually start the process and scan them, but also we want to collect the information, and we want to create a database that we can share with private developers. Because one of the challenges on the private side that I hear from is that private developers have limited project development budget. It's hard for them to try to go and find these assets. It's hard for them to even figure out who they should talk to, how they should get the information, who's the point of contact. And through this process, we're trying to make sure that we actually take those barriers down. We want to knock those walls down. We want to make sure that basic information is available with a point of contact, and private developers can just quickly use that information, put a business case together, reach out to the right person, and if the asset is really good for development, they can come up with ideas. Of course, we promote a more competitive process, but there could be also other types of arrangements that even someone already owns an asset next to a transit station. That could be a joint development, for example, with a transit station. That two of them can get together and then try to join forces, and half of the land from a private developer, half of the land from the transit agency, and figure out how they can actually collaborate and work together. That's the purpose of this program. I know that I covered it very quickly, and I tried to just touch on a lot of points. Of course, there's more detail. And by the way, don't rely on what I told you today when you're submitting your applications. Make sure that you go and read the NOFO. Make sure that you watch the webinars that we have on our website, because they are more accurate than what I just told you today. I'm just trying to stay high level and try to explain things and terminologies that if you really want to understand them better, there are resources on our website and you'll be able to have access to them. So with that, I will just stop. As I said earlier, although today's meeting is about this particular program, but please look at other tools that we have in our toolbox, Regional Infrastructure Accelerator, and some of the other ones, and see which one is the best tool for you, for your community, and for your constituents. I finish my remarks today with a good news. Although this whole process is challenging, we're talking about TOD loans. The whole TOD program is new for us. We got expanded authorities under bipartisan infrastructure law. Literally, we put that program together about 2 or 3 years ago, and especially with the emphasis of this administration on the importance of transit-oriented development, we tried to push things forward faster. It's new. We tried to develop everything from scratch. But I'm glad to share with you that yesterday we closed our first TOD loan in the city of Mount Vernon, Washington. And because, oh, thank you. And it's actually very interesting because what they have done is that they built a parking garage so that cars, instead of parking on the street, can go and park in this garage in downtown to free up valuable space on the streets. It could be additional curbside space. It could be additional seating space for businesses. But not only that, they're putting public charging infrastructure for EVs. They are putting a library there. They're putting a commercial kitchen there. They're putting some community space, community rooms, and a whole bunch of other things that I can't remember at all. But think about how under one roof they have put all of these services. They financed it through us. And they took advantage of a very important program for projects less than $100 million, as long as they are located in an area with a population of less than 150,000, which Mount Vernon falls under that category. We cut the interest rate to half. So we gave them a loan that's going to cover almost half of their project cost. Guess what's the rate? Half of Treasury rate yesterday. Treasury rate was around 4.8%. So their loan was about 2.3, 2.4%. Just think about how much city is saving by borrowing 2.3% to build this project. Our TOD pipeline is growing very fast, although it's new. We have over $12 billion in requests today that I'm talking. Probably the number is even more because I get my numbers from my team, but we keep receiving letters of interest almost every week now. And TOD represents 1/3 of TFIA's pipeline. The entire program now is about $40 billion. That's the amount of loans that we have that we are working on them. And 1/3 of it almost is TOD now. That tells you that how much interest is out there for transit-oriented development projects. And that's where I stop. I know that I took a little bit more than what I had, but thank you very much for listening to me today.
I'd like to ask our other panelists to come on up. Oh, do I have to? This is on. Okay. Okay, while everyone's getting set up, I'll just remind everyone that the program we're here talking about, we just heard the Innovative Finance and Asset Concession Program is making available $100 million in grants over 5 years to public entities doing pre-development work to structure public-private partnerships and other innovative finance and delivery mechanisms for transportation and transit-oriented development projects. It's up to $1 million in funding per application with no local match requirement, and an additional $1 million in funding with a match. So we're talking about free money in order to access almost free money, is what I just heard. So I'm intrigued, and I'd like to know more. Before we dig in, I'd like to ask each of the new panelists who've just joined us on stage to introduce themselves. Yona, can we start with you?
Sure. It's great to be here today. My name is Yona Freemark. I am the lead of the practice area on fair housing, land use, and transportation at the Urban Institute.
I'm Ben McAdams, former mayor of Salt Lake County, former member of Congress, former state senator, and now I lead the Putting Assets to Work initiative, where we work with cities and counties and states to help them identify assets that they own that are underutilized and help to think through how they can build capacity around creating value, whether it's affordable housing or sustainability from those assets that can come back to benefit the residents of the community.
And I'm Tracy Haddon-Lowe. I'm a fellow here at Brookings Metro, and I study commercial real estate. Okay, so let's jump in. I think we got a little taste of it with the breaking news that you heard here first, that the first TIFIA loan for a TOD project has closed. Congratulations. That gave us a sense of what it means to put an asset to work. But I'd like to invite each panelist to expand on that a little bit more. We just heard of the example of this cool, like, consolidating parking into a structure in order to free up all of this surface space previously used for car storage for more higher economically productive uses, like, for example, streetery, perhaps. But could each of you take a turn at expanding on what it means to put an asset to work? Yona, we'll start with you.
What I think we need to see all over the country is increased investment in housing near our public transportation. This has been obviously something that you discussed and something that is of importance to the administration and many people throughout the policy community, but it's something that we've also failed at to a large degree over the past many decades. You know, when I've looked at this, the rates of construction of housing near transit, what I've seen is that the vast majority of new housing constructed in the United States is actually quite far from the public transportation systems that we invest in. And that's a concern from a climate perspective, from an equity perspective, from an affordability perspective. And I think what's really exciting about some of the new programs that you're describing is that they can, in the right circumstances, be used for creating affordable housing specifically near our public transportation stops. And one element that was not mentioned that I think is a key opportunity that can be combined with the TIFIA and RIF programs potentially is the asset disposition guidance that the Federal Transit Administration recently introduced the interim guidance for. So this was introduced as part of the 2022 Defense Authorization Bill. But essentially it allows transit agencies to transfer over land that they're not really using anymore to local authorities or nonprofits, and in some cases private developers, to build housing with a large affordable component. In my mind, this is a huge opportunity because lots of transit agencies have land left over around stations, land along lines where they are no longer using it. They had used it for construction. And I think if we can see agencies around the country starting to pull in that land, combine it with some of these loan programs, we could see a boom in construction around transit.
So I'll just follow that up by saying, just to clarify, that previously transit agencies who used federal dollars in order to acquire land were legally required to then, if they weren't going to use the land, if they were going to surplus it, to sell it at the market rate. So, like, imagine the facial expression if you're an affordable housing developer and you go to your partner, the publicly owned transit authority, and say, hey, let's work together. And the transit authority says, yeah, but I have to get paid. It's not a great face. Ben, I'd like to go to you now. You are following a distinguished public service career now with devoting your life to helping local governments put assets to work. Why? What does it mean to you?
Well, you know, public service, I would say, is in my DNA. So I love public service. When I left Congress, I was looking for ways that I could continue to give. And I still wanted to have, I still had a desire for public service. So I looked at this work that I'd done when I was mayor. So when I was mayor of Salt Lake County, we were, I was scouring the budget to try and figure out ways that we could do things that were important in our community. And I asked the maybe naive question of, what does our balance sheet look like? I understand what our cash flow looks like, where money's coming into the city, to the county. I know what we're spending it on, but help me understand our balance sheet. And it was it was almost like I was speaking a foreign language, right? So governments don't oftentimes have a robust sense of a balance sheet. And I said, let's figure out what our assets are. And so we did an asset scan to identify all government-owned assets in Salt Lake County that had commercial potential. We excluded things like our watershed or the airport runway that, you know, clearly has a function that is not going to change. And what we found was jaw-dropping for us. We found 44 square miles of government-owned real estate. That's roughly a tenth of the size of the county. And we estimated that our real estate portfolio was valued at about $13 billion. And this is a county where we spend about $1.3 billion a year. So 10 times our annual spend was tied up in real estate that was not on the tax rolls. And we didn't really have a centralized function of looking at how we maximize the return on that real estate. So Certainly I think when I say government doesn't know what they own, certainly somebody knows. I give the example of, the city has a salt pile where we store salt for de-icing our roads. And the public works director knows there's a salt pile. They know what it's used for. But oftentimes that salt pile was placed in the location 75 years ago, and it was placed on cheap land 75 years ago, and the uses of that land have changed over 75 years. So we did see this exact example and found that the salt was sitting on incredibly valuable land in a neighborhood where there's an incredible need for affordable housing. And so it's rethinking how we use that land. I'll give a quick example of one of the things that we did when I was mayor. We had purchased property to build an office building for our prosecutors. Our prosecutors were in rented space. We did a calculation. We felt it would be better for us to own than to rent. So we purchased this property that was right adjacent to the state courthouse. It was also adjacent to a light rail stop. And we were designing a two-story building that would fit for our prosecutors. And I realized as we were starting this process that I'm a mayor who talks about smart growth and utilizing and transit-oriented development. I said, whoa, we're about to build a surface parking lot and a low-rise building on a fantastic parcel. That would be hypocritical of us. So we took a step back, re-envisioned it. What we ended up building, we consolidated on the parcel. We built a 7-story building on the mid-block and preserved a corner parcel that could be commercial development. So then the county entered into a 99-year lease agreement for that parcel to build Class A office space. We're collecting $500,000 a year off of that parcel. That's going into our general fund and helping to support criminal justice reform initiatives that were important to the county. So, and sometimes putting assets to work is affordable housing. Sometimes in this case, we did lease it for a market rate. It was transit-oriented site, a great place for jobs, and we're leasing it out at a market rate that is helping to subsidize a different priority of the county.
Morteza, is that what asset recycling is?
Actually, the term asset recycling, I think it was first used in Australia. I know that the way that the model works is if you have, let's say, a toll road, it's already generating revenue. Let's incentivize public owner of that toll road to privatize it, and federal government is going to give a bonus to whoever goes through that process to privatize it, take the money, and go invest it in other priorities that may exist. I like the model we have here a little bit better because what we're talking about is different. What we're talking about is let's actually give money to localities, to project owners who have these assets, as you mentioned. They may not know what's the best use for it. They need some help. They need to build capacity. Not only they need to identify, they need to study. They need to do market sounding. They need to talk to other developers to come up with ideas. And many of them, they don't have capacity. So instead of incentivizing all the way at the end, let's actually give them the tools and resources they need up front to do the analysis, to consider all options, and figure out what option gives the best value to taxpayers. So to me, the model that we are talking about here today is much more effective, and it is exactly what is needed in this market.
So everyone's already shared some cool examples, but let's do like one more round. Could each of you share what you view as like what the ideal project for this particular grant opportunity would be? What do you think the winners should be? Yona?
What I want to see is a transit agency work with a local government on thinking about how they want to use the assets related to a new transit line that they're building. So cities all over the country are building transit lines right now. One example that I recently looked at is the new Purple Line subway extension in Los Angeles. They're building a number of subway stations all over the west side of Los Angeles. And those subway stations are in really valuable locations that, for the most part, don't have great access to affordable housing. They're in places near, Beverly Hills, et cetera.
I've heard of that.
You've heard of it. So, these are places that actually need a lot of affordable housing. So what I'd like to see is the city of Los Angeles, maybe county of Los Angeles, maybe the metro, work together to try to identify what assets they can use from the construction sites that were used for the construction of that subway, and then see if they can convert those assets into sites for maybe social housing investments that can include a significant amount of new affordable housing, perhaps combined with some market rate housing in mixed use spaces that will do a number of things. Number one, They'll give people access to communities that are off limits to them right now because there's not enough housing, especially affordable housing in those locations. Number two, it will increase the financial stability of the transit system because they'll have more riders, because they'll have thousands of people living in the areas right around the transit station. I think when you put those things together, what I'm envisioning is a Los Angeles and perhaps other cities all over the country that is denser, more vibrant, and gives people all the access that they need from the transit system.
Ben, I know you have bigger dreams than a productive salt pile.
Yes. Well, I think what is really powerful about this grant program, Morteza said that what they are doing with this program is really meeting governments where they are. Instead of at the end of the road, we're meeting them at the beginning of the road. So the grant program has 3 lanes. One is an asset scan. So some governments are like Salt Lake County was 10 years ago. We didn't really even know what we own. And so going in and identifying those assets really was a mentality shift. It helped us to then going forward, every time we look at a project, we think, are we getting the most out of this asset that we can? If we're building a library, is there more that can fit on this site? If we're building a senior center, can we do senior housing as attached to our senior center instead of just building a 1-story building in a parking lot? So thinking about how we get more out of our assets. So I think the asset scan is an important precursor for that for many governments who don't even understand what assets they have. Then the second lane is a program of existing assets, looking at assets you maybe already understand that you have, but having to think through the zoning and the uses and what utility needs are there for the assets. So getting a little bit more capacity building on a program of assets. And then the third lane is expert services. You know an asset, you've identified it, you know there's potential there, but you really need to dig deep into this. Maybe you're doing environmental studies and reviews, you're looking at power and sewer capacity for that site, but really getting it closer to the point that then you're able to go and access TIFIA, access partners with private developers who can come in and help you to make the most of that. But there really is an opportunity under this grant program to meet jurisdictions where they are and to get them further down the road to doing this work.
Morteza, when I was in college, I used to just go ask the TA what I needed to do in order to get an A. Could you share with the class?
Of course. Have an open mindset, just be innovative. Think about various things that can be done. All we can do today is to give you a couple of examples, but these are not the only ways to take advantage of this grants. Read the NOFO. If you think there is a way that you can take advantage of it, put it forward. Worst case scenario is that you may not get it this round. You may get some feedback from us on how to improve your application and apply for it next round.
There we go.
And I can give a couple of examples, actually. Like, for example, with bus maintenance facilities for electric buses, we have financed so far 3 in California. They're different than diesel bus maintenance facilities because you can actually develop something on top of them. There is no pollution. It's completely different scenario, different environment. So the asset here is air rights on top of the assets, like other assets that we have. Or we can think about, for example, rail yards in downtown areas. Can we move those rail yards, or can we consolidate some of them to create space? We just talked about how we can consolidate various services in one building. After COVID, maybe we don't need all the offices space. Maybe we don't need all the administration offices that we have. Is there a way to consolidate some of that space in one building and free up some of the other buildings that can be developed? We can just go on and on and on and talk about examples. So my suggestion to everyone is that just think about your needs, get as innovative as you can, do your best in submitting application. Worst case that can happen to you is that you're not going to get selected, but you can always, after the fact, come to us, ask how we can improve it, make the improvements, and reapply.
Okay, so if all this makes so much sense, why isn't everyone already doing it? Yona?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is there's resistance in a lot of communities to doing exactly the things that we just described in a number of ways. Just to give you my example, in Los Angeles, there are lots of folks in Beverly Hills who certainly don't want additional housing in their areas. And so they put up zoning obstacles to get in the way. So that's one component that comes from the local level. But we've also seen some barriers from the federal level as well. Some of the ways that the rules are currently designed, from my perspective, seem to be a little difficult to work around if you're trying to do things like build housing. there's a high credit worthiness standard that makes it quite difficult for a typical housing project to get through this process. So I'm really excited about seeing some projects that actually do make it, to see what they do that's different. And another thing that I think is potentially problematic is that we have an issue in the US federal government and in actually most of our states and most of our cities where we have decided to separate transportation from housing policy. Okay, we have different departments at our cities, we have different departments in the federal government here in Washington. And the Build America Bureau, as you noticed, is part of the Department of Transportation. And that concerns me because it means that the folks who might know the most about investing in housing aren't necessarily the folks who are overseeing these loans. And so what I'd really like to see is more clear collaboration coming from this administration between those agencies to show how they can get housing moving under these programs.
Ben, does what Yona said resonate with you?
Absolutely. So before going into public service, I taught securities regulation at the University of Utah, and I would start my class with a dumb joke. I would say, two economists are walking down the road, and one says to the other, "Hey, look, I think I see a $10 bill lying on the ground up there." And the other one chuckles and says, "If there was a $10 bill lying on the ground, somebody would have picked it up already." And so I've thought about this as I've led the Putting Assets to Work incubator over the last couple of years. I've asked myself, is there really a $10 bill lying there, or did somebody pick it up already? What am I missing? Why are there billions of dollars of government assets just sitting there not being used? And I think the answer is, in my mind, the answer is yes, there is money lying on the ground right there waiting for somebody to pick it up. But the first thing is nobody knows it's there. So the asset scan, go in and identify your assets. And again, the Public Works Director knows there's a salt pile there, but the Public Works Director, their job is to see that as a salt pile, to not see that as a potential affordable housing development. So people don't see it. If they do see it, what the typical government with that salt pile, the typical response would be, okay, we've got an incredible opportunity here. Public Works Director, can you build us an affordable housing development? And he's going to say, no, I have no idea how to do that, right? So the second problem is a capacity problem. Governments don't know how to do this because the people who are responsible, who are stewards over the parcel, it's not their job to think about a complex public-private partnership. So the second part of the grant is capacity building, programming of an existing asset. And then the third one is, and we've seen this with many governments, that they go in, they know there's an asset, they know there's potential, they're ready to move on it, but then they're just little barbs on it. So it's like, well, we really need that parking because, there's surge events during the year when that parking is used. And we know it sits empty for 10 months out of the year, but there's 2 months when it's used and we can't go without it. And so there's a little barb there to say, okay, how do we figure that out? It's not, a private developer is not going to come in and figure that out for you. So that's where it gets to the expert services and going in and saying, okay, what do we do to mitigate parking needs during the surge event and how do we work through it? So I would say, yes, it absolutely resonates. We've got a few problems. And then it's also, well, that's the school district's parcel and the public utilities has control over it. And so you've got it kind of decision-making is dispersed amongst numerous different governments. So I think we're close. There is a $10 bill on the ground, but figuring out how to pick it up is easier said than done.
Morteza, what are you hearing in these letters of interest? Do some of them mention barbs?
It's actually interesting because in the conversations I have with folks, I think lack of capacity is really important. I go and talk to mayors, to cities. They love the idea of some of these grant programs. Guess what? The deadline comes, they don't even apply. Go back to them, why didn't you apply? Oh, we were overstretched, we didn't have a staff to even work on a simple application. Just think about it. These are capacity building grants that they can't even apply for them. So trying to provide them with the resources that they need to be able to think outside the box. And by the way, making change, we're talking about transformative changes. We are talking about changing the way that people have been doing these projects, making decisions for decades. It takes time. It's not easy. Not only they need capacity, that changing that mindset, it requires a surgery. It requires patience. We just need to keep pushing for it. We need to educate people. We need to give them the right tools, the right resources. And also, I think sometimes when some of these good projects happen, it's on all of us to tell that success story. Because once you go to them, people sometimes ask me that why people are not taking that $10. We can ask the question in a different way sometimes. It's not about why. It's interesting because sometimes people tell me that why should I use your programs? They're not used to someone going to them and trying to sell some of these products that sounds too good to be true. And I always change that. I said that why shouldn't you use this program? You know that your neighboring city, your neighboring state has financed the project, has got this built, has saved taxpayers 20, 30%. So telling them about those stories to not only trying to convince them to do it, but also making it hard for them not to do it. I think that's what we're trying to do through the storytellings, through case studies, through educational programs. And I'm so glad to be here because what you're doing is exactly what is needed to not only let them know about the opportunities, but also show them the other side, that by not doing it, these are some of the other things that you are imposing on your own taxpayers. So you're not a good steward of taxpayers' money. So.
Okay, but I also heard that maybe people aren't picking up the $10 bills because they have to have an investment grade rating in order to do that, for example. So is there a solution to that? Are there things about the regulatory requirements for accessing TIFIA that the Biden administration is looking at providing administrative relief around?
Yes. So we are facing with different issues. One issue is lack of capacity, lack of education from borrower's side. Oftentimes, we are not even getting any letter of interest, any application, and they're complaining about how difficult the process is. Like, just submit something so we can work with you. Let's get the ball rolling, and we will together figure out how to get it to the finish line. So that's one thing. We talked about that. The second thing is some of the legislative requirements that we have. Of course, we need to stay within legislative bounds that we have. The only thing we can do, we cannot do something that's illegal, right? If we don't have legislative authority, we cannot do it. But at least we can highlight it for legislators. We can provide them with some options, some solutions. And if they see that it's necessary, they can go ahead and change the legislation. And we have done that. Like, I've had multiple conversations with folks on the Hill. There's a lot of interest about these programs on the Hill. We're making sure that we pass to them all the information they need to have on their side to take actions as necessary. But also there is somewhere in the middle is the improvements that we can do within the administration that doesn't require legislative change. And we have taken a couple of those steps. I can very quickly tell you about a few of them. There's a rulemaking that went out. It was just finalized. First we went out for comments and it just got finalized. That rulemaking talks about how, for example, we can set the longer-term interest rates up to 75 years, how we are not going to require inclusion in TIP and STIP for certain types of projects. This was an unintended consequence of just adding new eligibility criteria under a legislation that 27 years ago was written for highways, because highways need to be in TIP and STIP. As we all know, TOD projects shouldn't be in TIP and STIP. And then also talks about another issue that a lot of borrowers have, which is on the RIF program, we do not get budget from Congress. We have not got any money appropriated to us to pay for what we call credit risk premium, which is basically the subsidy cost of these loans. So we would pass that to borrowers, project sponsors. But through that rulemaking, we have made it easier because now we just transform that or translate that into an additional interest rate, so they don't need to come up with money up front to pay, which was a big issue for them, liquidity issue. We have been talking to rating agencies. You brought up the rating issue. Yes, legislatively, TIFIA borrowers are supposed to provide 2 investment grade rating. Rating agencies were not used to rate real estate deals, but we have had various conversations with them today. I know at least one rating agency has developed some internal guidelines, and they're ready to rate real estate deals. And the other 2 that we have been talking to are in the process of doing it. So that's another thing that we have done. And then we are talking about various ways, various options, various structures that could enhance credit risk of these projects. For example, the flexibility that our loans provides is that you can close a loan with us, but until you draw on the loan, we're not going to charge any interest. So although the loan is going to be closed, it's going to be committed, the rate is going to be set, but they can go to a bank and say that, well, I have this federal loan. give money to me, let me go through construction, and at the end of construction, I'm going to draw on this federal loan to pay you back as a takeout facility. By doing that, they're taking construction risk off table, which makes our loan, the credit of our loan, to go up because we don't need to analyze the construction risk or construction completion risk. And that's one way, for example, to kick up the rating one notch to get to investment grade rating. That's one example. There are many more examples, but that's why I said that we need to have an open mindset, look at all options, come talk to us because we can actually explore various options. We can kick the tires. We can give you feedback. You don't need to figure it out all by yourself. Come talk to us. My underwriters are ready to talk. And if we can find a way to get projects to investment grade rating so they can move forward, we would love to do that.
Before I ask any more questions, I want to open it up to the audience. Is there anyone here who has a burning question that they want to ask to this panel? This is your chance. Yes, ma'am. Can we get a mic to the front row, please?
You touched on. Good. All right. You touched on one of the elephants in the room, which is in every downtown in America, certainly every downtown with transit, we have a surfeit of office vacancy and a dearth. Thank you. And a dearth of housing, right? So, are there ways that you might be able to pre-package, that kind of an approach to help make it easier? So that's one thing. The other one is the Invest in America program. So you talked about trying to get in at the front end to have these conversations. Invest in America is kind of doing the opposite. So we're encouraging people to put jobs, massive numbers of jobs sometimes, in places all around the country. And those businesses are doing what they've always done, which is find the cheapest land in the state and going there. Nowhere near population, nowhere near transit, nowhere near, the people who would fill the jobs. Is there a way for the Build America Bureau to maybe partner with some places to try to put transit in? And maybe some of those places would be urban places, but other places might be smaller communities that could have a transit system right from the get-go and a land use plan and bring in housing that would go with the massive jobs that they're bringing.
One of the things that we are doing these days is conducting workshops. We go to places that they do have ideas, conceptual plans, and they want to bring various players to the room and try to figure out how various stakeholders can get together and think about how to get things done in a different way. I'm actually coming from one of those workshops in Florida. So yes, there is a way. Those workshops are very effective. We would love to talk to people. We would love to explore options and opportunities. So yes, come talk to us. Let's figure out what we can do. We would love to get involved as early as possible to be able to come up with the best plan that through conversations with various stakeholders, it incorporates various aspects of policy goals and objectives that we are trying to achieve together. About your first question, there was an announcement by White House in October, specifically focused on office to residential conversion. We can finance those projects as long as they meet all the other eligibility criteria that we have in the legislation, as long as they're within half a mile of a transit station. And I believe there are like 3 or 4 eligibility criteria in the legislation that we have. But for those projects, we can give them a loan to convert office buildings into residential buildings or other needs that a community may have. We are working right now with multiple projects, and we actually saw a huge uptick in our TOD pipeline right after that announcement. There is a lot of interest out there on what you just explained.
I guess I would add, this is one of the things that we're working on with putting assets to work is how do we problem solve some of the things that what's not working in government? Why is there a $10 bill lying there? Why hasn't anybody picked it up? And one of the things that we've identified is the common path for government, and it's not the only path, but for some reason it's the path that most governments will choose, is when you see that salt pile, the next thing you do is you turn to the public works director and you say, we want you to do a mixed use, multifamily, affordable housing development in the public work. And then we say, oh, and by the way, here are the rules of the game. You cannot talk to anybody in the private sector who knows anything about real estate, because that would get it. We want you to do an RFP and you can't talk to experts. So don't talk to anybody, write an RFP and let us know how it goes. And then along the way, we'll sit and add ornaments to that. We're going to say, here's the affordability mix, but we might change that down the road. And here's the, density mix and the open space mix. And we sit and add all these things to it without talking to the market, because we're insulated from the market. And we come out with an RFP 3 years later and nobody responds. And we think, I guess there wasn't a $10 bill lying on the ground because nobody responded to our RFP. And we just missed the mark because we didn't have this, the right people at the table to figure out what this is like. And so one of the things that we talk to governments about is rethinking their procurement approach. I mentioned before going into public service, I was a bond attorney, I was a securities attorney. And so when I was mayor, I was very interested in our process for issuing bonds. I will tell you what was a comfort to me is the amount of time that I spent on a bond issuance was about 20 minutes signing the paperwork, maybe 10 minutes with the CFO telling me that it was a good proposal and whatnot. The amount of time that my CFO spent on it was probably more than that, but my CFO wasn't a bond attorney and wasn't expected to, and we didn't do an RFP and say we want to issue a sales tax bond and we want to charge 3% and write all of this and see who responded to the RFP. What we did is we had municipal financial advisors who were pre-qualified to advise us, and they would actually come to us and they would say, hey, we've been looking at your bond portfolio and we think you have an opportunity to refinance and we'll do the bond issuance for you. They were pre-qualified. So why don't we do that with our real estate? Why do we say in the case of real estate, we're going to be the experts and we're going to bear the burden of writing the RFP and telling the market what they want, instead of flipping the script and maybe having 4 or 5 qualified property advisors in this case to come back and tell us what the opportunities are. And sure, at that point we can say, well, that's an interesting proposal to turn that parking lot into housing, but we want to see we want you to push the limits a little bit further on affordability. And you can have that dialogue, but you can't have that dialogue if you haven't done your procurement through like an RFQ approach first. If there's an RFP looming out there, you just can't have that dialogue. And it pours cold water over the whole process. And I think that's part of the reason why there's $10 bills lying everywhere.
If you don't mind, I do just want to respond to one thing you said, which I think is an important point that is perhaps being under-discussed. A lot of this administration has been about, place-based investments. There's been a lot of discussion about how we're spending billions and billions of dollars on specific investments for specific places. But at the same time, there's been sort of a lack of discussion about spatial planning. I'm not sure if it's the specific people involved or the broader policy atmosphere, but the result has been that we're spending tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars on jobs investments, often to exurbs, sometimes not even exurbs, with extremely poor location accessibility, with complete inability of people who actually need jobs to be able to access those places. And this problem is not getting better. I've looked at the most recent announcements. This isn't exactly related to this program that we're discussing today, but perhaps it is. I think one challenge that a government like the United States has is because we have so many programs, so many agencies, perhaps sometimes we lose out on the ability to coordinate between them. And I was happy to hear about some of the coordination that you described, but I think there's more thought that needs to be put into the giant investments that we're giving to corporations to add jobs to locations without thinking about the transportation implications of those investments, the housing implications of those investments. So perhaps that's something we can try to work for in more concrete ways over the coming years.
I don't know. I think there's an inherent tension coming up here between like adding the ornaments onto the things, or like making a bagel delicious with everything spice, versus just like feeding the hungry. It seems to me that there are good reasons why this isn't always happening, and the question is just how can we get it closer to right in terms of the priorities that are centered in these processes and the things that we say, okay, like could have been nice and cute, but not going to get that one done within this scope. So with that, I think it's time to transition to our next panel. So I want to thank you guys so much for this lively conversation. I think that we're going to hear from some local governments now their thoughts about what can be done in order to make it easier to put assets to work and specifically to use TIFIA. So thanks for getting this conversation started. For everyone in the audience, the conversation will continue.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite our next panel to come on up now. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for journeying inside the Beltway so that we can get a reality check from where you work about what it takes in order to put assets to work. Before we dive in, I'd like to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Josh, can we start with you?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Josh Humphreys, serve as Senior Advisor to Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens and lead affordable housing and anything else that pleases the mayor on a given day. We're doing a lot of work on public land, so looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Hansen. I am the State Planning Coordinator in the Utah Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and former Planning Director for the Utah Transit Authority.
Jonathan Butler, Senior Vice President of Community Development for Partner Tulsa.
Thanks so much for being here with us today. So you each have a project idea that could be a fit for this program, but each of these ideas is really different. So I think it would be enlightening for our audience here and everyone online if you could each tell us a little bit about your example project and what work these assets would be put to. Let's hear like the 2-minute elevator pitch from each of you about your asset and what the opportunity is. We'll start on this end.
Well, I'm a recovering attorney, so it's very difficult for me to explain anything in 2 minutes, but we'll try. I represent an organization that is a combination of 5 different entities. We're switching. Is this your slides, Laura?
Keep going.
Okay, keep going. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. I represent an organization that is a combination of 5 different entities. One of those entities just so happens to include the Urban Renewal Authority. It's called the Tulsa Development Authority. In Tulsa, our mayor had the foresight to put organizations together to streamline and make things more efficient. But that organization that I referenced has a history associated with urban renewal practices. Many in our community would call it urban removal practices that had the effect of bisecting, segregating, and separating large portions of our community. Of course, in a lot of American cities, highways and railroad tracks have been tools of segregation for generations. Our community is no different. What we are embarking upon is an extraordinarily ambitious, Tracy, project in which we are trying to recenter and co-design with community what will happen to 56 acres of publicly owned land. The ideas and the vision for our work are centered in 3 tracks. They are called these opportunity sites. And within the context, we have designed an opportunity for community to create the vision and the master plan for this project of how we would redevelop these 56 acres. It's all been community-led, community-centered, and community-driven. When I talked to you earlier about those bisecting pathways, this community is, although it's close in proximity to our traditional downtown, it's very disconnected. So from a transportation standpoint, you feel like all of the growth on one side of the highway is experienced and none of the growth on the other side of the highway is experienced. You also have a combination of what is urban and very rural. Our community in Oklahoma lives at intersections that I'll talk about a little bit later of all types of things in terms of race, identity, tribal nations, and history. But what's also apparent in our community is a very big disconnect between transportation, corridors, veins, connecting tissue, housing, and the community in which we are attempting to represent. I'll stop there and let the other panelists speak and welcome the next questions on the upcoming presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to just zip back here really quick. So this is Salt Lake City. We're very lucky to have our international airport just 5 to 10 minutes away from our downtown area, which is right where the big Salt Lake City is. And you can see the red box is our project area. This is about 170 acres. In the yellow is our state fairgrounds, which attracts 300,000 people every year for the fair. To the kind of smaller yellow parcel on the bottom side is about a 10-acre area that is currently used for parking and the site of our project area. And then in the blue is a power plant that is scheduled for decommission, and they're working with a private developer to consider what could happen on that parcel. And so it feels like this wonderful opportunity for us to capitalize on that. This area, as we were just talking about, is separating our community into two halves, really. We have our interstate, I-15. There's a set of railroad tracks. There's a waterway that flows through here. And this side of town has historically been the area that we have underinvested in. It has more diversity, lower income, and it's a great opportunity for us to help uplift that community. Also, it happens to be along our light rail line, the green line, and this is a view. You can see the vacant parking lot there. That's what our parcel looks like right now. This happens to be the gateway to our community, right? You get off the airport or out of the airplane, and this is what you see. Welcome to Salt Lake City, right? I think we can do better than that. And these are just a couple of really preliminary teasers of what the private company that's working on the power plant site is considering. They are trying to attract a Major League Baseball team to our state, and then the orange arrow is pointing to that vacant parking lot that I think we could do a little bit more with. Just one more quick image of the possibilities there. Very preliminary, but we have an opportunity to incorporate housing, new jobs, new opportunities, and really create some amenities for a part of our city that deserves better.
So Morteza said we should be innovative and give him a bunch of weird different projects. So, well, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, so behind her project, you can see by now it's
Salt Lake City Airport has landed in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, we're going to bring Salt Lake City, and so. Early last year, the city had an opportunity. You mentioned office residential conversion and the need for downtowns. Downtown Atlanta, like a lot of other downtowns in the U.S., is facing challenges post-COVID. Not enough residents, too much office space that's aging, and so we've got an oversupply of office and undersupply of housing broadly. And an opportunity came up with a project called 2 Peachtree. The state of Georgia owned the property, was downsizing post-COVID into some other offices. And so we approached them and were able to work out a deal with the governor to acquire the property. So the city jumped in to buy the property. And in large part, is like we know we have to solve this problem. We don't know exactly how we're going to solve this problem, but this particular building makes a lot of sense for housing. And it's on top of 5 Points MARTA Station, which is the center of the heavy rail system in Atlanta. So it is a transit-oriented office to residential conversion. There's a lot of hashes in there, I think, and dashes. And we selected a development team toward the end of last year to do 625 units of housing. Got a hotel in there, a little bit of office, and And the plan right now is to preserve the property, to use historic tax credits. One of the things that's interesting about this site, it was built in 1966, so it recently aged into historic tax credit eligibility. It also, when it was built, was the tallest building in the southeastern United States. And a fun little fact: the blue building you can see kind of behind Salt Lake City here is the site of where Jacob's Pharmacy was, which is where the first Coca-Cola on Earth was ever sold. And so this is literally the heart and soul of Atlanta, on top of like the oldest part of the city. And so we're excited about this project, and really we think it's the halo effect of pulling this off and moving this forward is bigger than just to Peachtree, right? Yeah, we get 600 units of housing right over a transit station, but also it has been a massive market signal for us. We now have over a half a dozen office resi conversions that are like either under contract or underway within a stone's throw of this property. And so we think that there's an opportunity not just for single projects, but really thinking catalytically about the kinds of projects that we're moving forward and how they impact cities.
Let's follow up on that. So you each work for very different kinds of entities. And so I'm intrigued as to why all these different kinds of organizations are thinking about putting assets to work. Is there something about this that relates to your organization's structure or revenue model that is incentivizing or motivating you to do this?
I think, Tracy, the easiest way to first answer your question is to do what we're imagining. People don't tend to do this. Governments definitely don't tend to do this. We look at this as a form of reparative justice in our work, to try to take public assets, create a community development corporation with community that would ultimately be the steward of this land and these resources, and figure out all of the mechanisms for community benefit within that. This is just something that people don't do. One of the reasons why I was attracted to join this team was because we thought that this was groundbreaking work. To be able to do that. Our site, a portion of it is represented from the 1921 race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When I said we live at intersections, we live at the intersections of some of the darkest and greatest moments in American history. Our Black Wall Street was prolific. The 1921 race massacre happens, and that community rebuilt itself back without reparations or insurance payouts. But this land then, after all of these generations, suffers from policies and practices that were government policies and practices. And so the use of eminent domain to acquire land, we are looking at this as a unique opportunity to then put back into community. Our revenue generating model for Partner Tulsa, we are the economic and community arm of the city. We are quasi city government, even though we aren't technically city government. We are our own public trust. All of these other organizations that make up our entity are all state-based through association. A part of our revenue model, we get a very small percentage of our operating budget from the city, but the lion's share of our resources are in other assets. They are in parking assets or parking garages or leases that we lease out for airline hangars. There are other mechanisms in which we are using property. A part of what we're attempting to do then is to take property that we own and figure out pathways to do greater economic development work that also increase economic mobility, but include power sharing, which is also a challenge for government entities to be able to work alongside community to be able to do. And so we look at this as a portion of it. We're going to end up selling this land and portions of it for what would amount to, you know, very, very small portions of money for what this property would command on the open market. It is desirable property right adjacent to our downtown. And so the unique community angle that we are exercising to do this development is to have community actually receive the lion's share of the benefit from these assets and these resources.
The vision of putting assets to work for racial justice and restorative justice over generations is incredible. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned that the state has a role in this. I see in, Laura, in your case, I get why Salt Lake City would be like, hey, this is an awesome idea. Why is the state of Utah at the table, other than that they control the asset?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, my title is State Planning Coordinator with an emphasis on coordination. And really my job is to help bridge those partnerships and bring partners together to accomplish things. We're a little bit behind both of your communities in this. We are just now starting to notice that this is an opportunity. There was a piece of legislation, not this most recent session, but the one prior, that actually directed my office to conduct an inventory of all publicly owned lands across the entire state, not just state property, but school districts, water districts, the DOT. And we're finding that that's an awful lot harder than it sounds like it should be. Utah's a pretty urbanized state, and only 20% of our population lives in kind of the rural parts of the state, and they don't have a lot of resources. And so many of them don't even have their parcel data digitized, and the tax assessors don't really care about it because it's off the tax rolls. And so in a lot of cases, we don't even know what we have out there. But we were at dinner last night and talking about how in Atlanta they did something similar, and they found an area where there were 3 or 4 pieces of property owned by different entities, and none of them knew that one another owned these properties. And you have this amazing opportunity for consolidation and doing a project. I think we will find opportunities like that in Utah as we continue to search. One other thing really quickly that we're doing that I think is kind of innovative, it's public assets of a different type. This last session, housing is an issue in our state as well, and we've been looking for ways to help stimulate construction of new housing. And we have a public treasurer's investment fund where municipalities and the state, when they have excess resources, they want it, maybe they're saving up for something, they can invest it with the state. Very conservative, generates a modest interest return. But we're investing those dollars all over the country and even the world. We should be putting those back to work in our own state. And so we created a new program called the Utah Housing Investment Program, where we're making $300 million available to partner with banks and lending institutions. So we're blending public and private funding. Developers, small to medium-sized developers that are having a hard time getting financing because of the regional bank collapses. Banks are holding on to larger reserves. They're having a hard time getting funding. And so this way we're helping kind of juice the economy, create more liquidity, and spur the development of additional housing. It's got a 3-year cap on it, so it's not forever. It's just to kind of get things jump-started, but that's something that we're thinking about doing.
Josh, what do you think about that? Georgia going to do that for you?
I mean, probably not, but that's a different conversation. So back to your question on this, I think it was really a driving political problem, a crisis that we needed to solve, right? So when the mayor took office, he had campaigned on affordable housing and set a goal to build, in our case, 20,000 affordable housing units over the course of 8 years. And he asked us to run the numbers, and I had the unfortunate pleasure of telling him that we were not on pace to get 20,000 affordable housing units, and that we needed to be creative and think about new tools, new resources that had not previously been on the table. And public land as an opportunity had been kind of sitting out in the ether in Atlanta for a while. There had been some stuff in previous mayor's action plans, but nobody had really moved on it. And so, with a campaign goal and a real need for residents to get housing and no line of sight on how to get there, those two things really created an opportunity for us to open this up. And so we went with full speed ahead on how do we take this on with the backing of this is helping us solve our affordable housing crisis. And that is a fun, like, for at least from in my mind, like a fundamental part of this, because like building land because it's a good idea, like that, you're only going to get so far. You're not going to build a lot of political will, but saying, hey, like this is part of helping us like face this existential threat to the city was key. And so what we did with that is coming out of it, we launched what we called a housing strike force. They pulled together all the public landowners. That's where we started. So the transit authority, the school system, the watershed department, and everything else, and said, hey, like we have to think interconnectedly and collaboratively about our land. Right, there are going to be times when the housing authority side is actually where the next school should go, and the school side is where we should build housing. And if we're not all sitting in the room together talking about this, then we're never going to get there. And so to the point that you raised, like we found 80 acres of land all like next to each other that was owned by the different stuff, and it's like, you know what, actually this corner is really where the school needs to go. And this needs to go here, but we had to get everybody together and then start talking about like, okay, well, building 600 units of housing on top of a transit station, well, that's actually really good for the ridership and the numbers for the transit authority as well. And building like more 3-bedroom units for like that are affordable is going to help school enrollment. Building school teacher housing is really good for. So all this stuff starts to fit together in a way where like actually like if we work together, we can accomplish all of our collective public policy goals. And for too long we've been working separately. So that kind of galvanized that. To date, we have 43 public land projects that are underway. Everything from large former housing authority sites to an infill station where we're actually building a fire station in Midtown Atlanta. We've got there was an old fire station, and we went to the fire chief. You know, the land is really valuable. It's like $20 million an acre land. It's right in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. Said, hey, well, what if we tore this fire station down and give you a brand new fire station, and you got about 30 floors of neighbors above you? And the fire chief was like, as long as I get a new fire station, I don't care who lives above me. And it's projects like that that have really kind of allowed this type of multidimensional thinking of thinking, can we do more with our land? And all in the spirit of addressing this housing problem that's been key.
I think that spoke directly to what we heard from the first panel in terms of like, well, why aren't local governments doing this more? And then what would it look like if they did do it? But I just want to invite our other panelists, as you were hearing that first panel, do you have any insights or defenses of local government that you want some airtime in order to share as a reality check on like, well, just get smarter and try harder? Anything to add?
I think what Josh has said is important. I think oftentimes, and what Ben alluded to earlier, this idea that we are often problem solving in silos and vacuums. We aren't including the right people around the table to be able to help in decision making, and that also includes oftentimes residents and community members as well, right? But oftentimes, if we're thinking about schools, we have people who are thinking about schools. We're in the process of integrating a new library into the same community through land that they've acquired. And so what we've done is say, how can we then put all of these groups at the table, which include neighborhood associations, to be able to say, how can we connect what's happening much more fluidly, right? And much more concretely. So I agree. I'm just piggybacking on some of the things that Josh and Ben have said, collaboratively thinking about impact and ensuring that you think about things from much more of an ecosystem-driven approach, I think are going to get all of us better outcomes and better results.
I don't know that I have anything more to contribute other than, I think there's a desire in every entity that owns a public asset is trying to do their best and be as responsible as possible. And sometimes they're just not aware of the opportunities that are there. And so I think this is a great program and chance for us to help facilitate that coordination.
Can I make one quick comment on this? To the point of capacity building, I think one core, yes, you want to build capacity is something that we focused on, but like having like just somebody whose job it is to think about this, that's not in public works, that's not in the fire department, that's not like that can kind of see the whole field and at least start trying to get their head wrapped around what the opportunities are. I think that is a core first step, because once you have that, then you can kind of at least start seeing how the pieces might fit together.
Before we open it up for audience Q&A, I want to conclude with asking our panel, do you have any advice for other local governments that might be looking at applying to this program or who might more broadly be wanting to explore accessing TIFIA? Any words of advice, wisdom, or warning?
I would just say this real quickly. You know, throughout the country, we're experiencing housing crisis. And the idea that in our community, we are about to release a housing strategy that includes, you know, everything from affordable housing development to market rate development. The thought process of being able to say, hey, if you are centered and focused on housing solutions, trying to find the connections within the transportation domain that makes sense so that we can bridge some of the gaps. When we do economic development work, we are finding industrial parks that, as you said, are far away from where people actually live. How can we think about then development in a way in which we are thinking about where are people going to live and how are we going to get people to be able to get to the jobs that are higher paying jobs and then back home and then be able to traverse their communities. And so that's what I would say. I think I would just say simply thinking about centering need, but thinking about need in a way that's much more robust than just housing. It is a transportation issue. It is a access to safe communities. It is a health and food security issue. All of those things can connect.
Laura, anything to add?
I would just add, as we've been exploring our own project, we found that we have different stakeholders with different interests that they're like, oh, I need to get this need met. And well, I need to get this need met. Look for opportunities where you can, I hate the phrase, but kill two birds with one stone, or feed two birds with one seed is a new one that I heard. But, you know, how can you have mutual gains? How can you get more people on transit? How can you reduce traffic congestion? How can you create more housing? How can you improve air quality? How can you provide better access to jobs and opportunities, and also address the needs of this one entity? I look for ways you can have common wins and see how you can add value and increase the pie.
Josh?
Don't overcomplicate it. Fine. Y'all hear me now? Hello? Don't overcomplicate it. Just find a project and get started. I mean, one of the first things we did is we categorized like ready to build, catalytic, complex, and we started with the ready to build. Like it builds momentum, it gets you in the process, and you learn a lot along the way.
I'd like to open it up to the audience.
So my advisory neighborhood commission used to meet in this room. So I'm thinking about community engagement, and my experience was oftentimes public sites have the most visceral community engagement because there's a sense of community ownership, even if the city owns it. So how do you think about being responsive to constituents who might not want to put assets to work, or only want to put assets to work when every ornament is on the Christmas tree, which means that the asset can't work in a way that is financially feasible?
I'll start with a quick stab at that. I feel like in Utah, we just completed a big conversation about growth, a big surveying exercise where we asked Utahns across the state, what do they want to see for the future of their state? And oftentimes public clamor is different than what polling results tell you. And so I would ask and encourage elected officials and folks that are maybe sticking their neck out to think about what maybe the silent majority is after, but also be aware of the impacts. Like, we're talking about a part of our neighborhood that has been kind of historically underrepresented. We want to make sure we're not gentrifying and displacing people, and so soliciting the input from the public in the neighborhood, I think, is going to be really critical, and working with them to say, how can we add value to your neighborhood and meet your needs at the same time? But yeah.
I think it's an excellent question. One of the things I will say that I don't think I gave adequate voice to about our plan is the co-design comes from community, in the sense that it's a 181-page master plan that is all based on community. So over 44 workshops, focus groups, surveys, all types of different ways in which we did community engagement, over 1,000 touch points with community, that resulted in them saying, this is the vision for what we want to see happen. So our job now is to go implement and execute, right, based on what they designed. So I think, number one, trying to engage people in a way in which they feel like they are co-designers in the process helps. I think the other thing is we adopted a framework when working with some members of our community. It's called Safe to Try. There have to be some mechanisms in which we start breaking down and trying to shift mindsets in ways in which we present a framework that says, well, what is safe for us to try? And I think that provides an opening for people to say, what about this? Can you envision this? You know, what are you afraid of when it comes to this? Can we agree on some points that are then safe for us to at least give a try, some effort, put some effort around and intentionality that then get us maybe closer to breaking down some of the NIMBYism and breaking down some of the conditions that say, you know, in our world, we might think highest and best use. In the community world, they might say, hey, this brings a bunch of traffic to my neighborhood, right? And so how do we start creating a framework that's safe for us to try that might be a middle ground, and maybe that's how we get to a different product in the introduction of a different product into our community.
Does this one work? Yeah, I was back. The one thing I'd mention that we're doing is really trying to flip the order of operations on its head on that. Oftentimes, local governments will go out and find a partner or a developer that's going to build, and then ask them to do the entitlement stuff, and then they get stuck with all the headwinds that they would have otherwise done, which I think is wild that we even think about it that way, because I think at the end of the day, it's on the public side to make sure that that the community feedback is inserted. So we have flipped that, right? Instead of creating this long tail on the back end after you select someone to say, hey, we're going to do the entitlement work on the front end, and we're going to give the developer entitled properties. But that means that work is done with the neighborhood before the developer is ever in there. And so it puts more on the public side in order to do that. But it also reduces the time risk for a developer that may come into a situation that could be a bit of a powder keg, and now they're stuck for 2 years working on entitlements. So it's a big shift in the way that we're approaching it. And we've had a lot of good results. I mean, similar to what you're describing in Atlanta so far.
More questions from the audience. I'm seeing hands.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. To what extent have you tried to bring the people together and get consensus by having meetings on the internet?
Meetings on the internet? I mean, I think we have a combination of, collaboration and team building and on this work has been really important. I would say some of that happens in person, some of it happens remotely. It really just depends for us.
I think it kind of depends on the community that you're working with also. But in some ways, I mean, the internet's great. I work as a professional planner, but the last thing I want to do is go to a public meeting in my neighborhood on my off time, but if I can fill out a survey from home, that's great. But not everyone has internet access. And, so I think a combination of tools is always critical.
Agreed. We've done it and we do it. I think just making things available for people in a different myriad of ways that meet them where they are is important.
And then I think we had one more question in the front here. Last one.
Okay. So Laura, you're the one who mentioned that there's an opportunity to align with a lot of other entities who might have a similar interest. And it really strikes me as odd that we're not talking about the fact that every one of the projects that has been discussed is a project that is managing travel demand, so that it's legitimately fundable with transportation dollars right now. Fundable, not financeable, fundable. So maybe that's another panel for another time, but I'm kind of curious about the degree to which the transportation entities, the MPOs, are getting engaged and maybe considering these projects as a transportation control measure that would improve the the access and the air quality in a given region. Atlanta has had some experience with that with the regional commission, but I love the Build America Bureau and what it is that they're trying to do, but it's really kind of bolting this financing carrot because we're not seeming to want to address the central problem, which is that we are endlessly providing supply. And then all of us are trying to work in the cities where we've supplied the exit routes for all the economic activity, trying to make it, put it back together again, when we should be, from the beginning, maybe saying, this is managing travel demand. This is something that's directly fundable.
Laura, I think we need to bring a planner in on this one.
Well, thank you. I was jumping. I have one of our partners and our local match contribution to our proposed project is our MPO, and our legislature just appropriated some funding, about $400,000, to do a travel demand study in this corridor. We're also planning a second light rail line from the airport up to the University of Utah that would come right through this corridor. And so we're right with you there, that there's a huge opportunity here in working with those partners at the beginning.
Gentlemen, any final words?
We're excited to see this program take off because I think that these types of financing opportunities help make projects viable, particularly in the current market that otherwise wouldn't be. And so we're full speed ahead. We always jump in head first in Atlanta, so bring it on.
I would just say, just building on your question a little bit, all of us are at some point have to be in a business of trying to innovate and shift mindsets. So what we're attempting to do is to do something unique and new and different, which oftentimes is not encouraged from government. And so knowing that these opportunities are there and we're trying to introduce them into our community and our state, I do think is important.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who's here with us today. I'd like to invite everyone who's here in person to join us outside for some light refreshments and the opportunity to ask questions and interact with our panelists from both the first and the second panel one-on-one. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.